ballroom of the Meridian Grand in downtown Chicago smelled like wealth, white roses and champagne, and the kind of quiet money that never has to announce itself. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling high enough to swallow secrets, and somewhere beneath them a string quartet played something that no one was actually listening to. Kyle Weston stood near the center of the room looking like a man who had finally arrived at the destination he always believed was his. His tuxedo was custom, his smile was practiced, and on his arm, Monica Briggs, 24 years old, 300,000 Instagram followers, and a laugh that could carry across a room, leaned close and whispered something that made him grin wider. Tonight was the unveiling of the Weston Wing at St. Aurelius Medical Center. A charitable donation, the press releases said. A gesture of gratitude to the community that had supported his tech company, Viridian Solutions, through its remarkable rise. Investors had come from New York and Boston. City officials had accepted his dinner invitations. The mayor's chief of staff stood near the shrimp tower, looking pleased. But Kyle's mind was not entirely on the evening speeches. Part of it was fixed on the entrance doors. He had sent the invitation 3 weeks ago. A crisp cream envelope, hand-addressed, delivered to a third-floor apartment in Oak Park that he had located through his assistant with almost surgical precision. He had signed the note himself. "You should be here to see this, after everything." Abigail Stanton had been his wife for 7 years. She had supported him through the early days when Viridian was nothing but a pitch deck and a prayer. She had worked 12-hour shifts in the ER at Northwestern Memorial so they could make rent. She had eaten cold soup standing over the kitchen sink so Kyle could eat a real dinner before his investor calls. She had believed in him with the kind of faith that doesn't ask for receipts. When she told him, 3 months after his Series B funding closed, that she was pregnant, not just pregnant but expecting twins, Kyle looked at her across their dining room table and said the words she would carry for years like stones in her coat pocket. "I didn't plan for this." By the following spring, Abby was out. Not dramatically. Not with shouting. He had simply made the apartment unlivable. The silence, the absence, the way he stopped looking at her. Until she packed 2 bags and moved to her cousin's place in Oak Park with a belly she could barely get through the doorframe. His lawyers were faster than she expected. By the time their daughters, Rosie and Pearl, were 6 weeks old, Abby had signed papers that left her with almost nothing. Kyle kept the condo, the investment accounts, and his version of the story, which circulated quietly among their social circle. "She wasn't ready for the life we were building. She held me back." People believed him. It was easier. He was rising. She was not. That had been 4 years ago. Now Abby lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests in geological time. She worked nights as a home health aide. The ER had felt impossible with 2 infants and no support system, and she had eventually let the career she'd spent years building slide out of her hands like water. She loved her daughters the way you love something you protected through a war. Fiercely, quietly, without anyone watching. She had not planned to go to the gala. When the envelope arrived, she stood in her kitchen, holding it for a long time. Rosie and Pearl were at the table behind her, fighting peacefully over a box of crayons. The invitation was heavy cardstock with embossed lettering. The Weston Wing Dedication Gala, black tie, Meridian Grand. She knew what it meant. She understood exactly what Kyle was doing. He wanted her there, in whatever she could afford to wear, standing at the edge of his spectacular evening, so that everyone who knew their history could see the difference between who he had become and what he had left behind. It was not an olive branch. It was bait. She almost didn't go. The night before the gala, she sat at her kitchen table after the girls were asleep and felt the full weight of 4 years pressed down on her. Her hands were dry from the sanitizing gel she used at her clients' homes. There were dark circles under her eyes that no longer surprised her in the mirror. In the cabinet above the sink was a box of mac and cheese she'd been saving for bad weeks, and she was trying to decide if this qualified. The invitation sat on the table in front of her. "You should be here to see this, after everything." She thought about all the things he had taken, not just the money or the apartment, the version of herself she had been building. the career she had quietly dismantled to hold his life together. The years she would not get back. Down the hall, she could hear one of the girls breathing through a slightly stuffy nose. She pressed her palms flat on the table and let herself cry for exactly 15 minutes. Then she stopped. The knock at her door came the next morning. Abby almost didn't answer it. She was in her bathrobe, the girls eating cereal at the table, her hair unwashed, but something made her pull the door open, and she found herself looking at Dr. Edmund Chase. She recognized him immediately. Most people in Chicago medical circles did. Edmund Chase was 61 years old, the founding director of the Chase Institute for Cardiac Research, and a man whose name appeared on hospital wings and medical school endowment plaques across the Midwest. He was tall, gray at the temples, and had the kind of unhurried presence that came from decades of standing in rooms where someone was dying and not panicking. She had met him exactly once, 5 years ago. She had been working a night shift in the ER when his daughter was brought in after a car accident. 19 years old, no heartbeat when they arrived, a trauma team that worked for 40 minutes before she stabilized. Abby had been one of them. She had done compressions until her arms shook. His daughter had survived. He had sent a note to the unit afterward. She had forgotten about it. "Abigail Stanton," he said at the door. "I apologize for coming without calling. I'm not sure I would have gotten through on the phone." She stared at him. "Dr. Chase." "May I come in?" He sat at her kitchen table while the girls regarded him with the frank curiosity of 4-year-olds. He did not treat them like accessories or problems. He looked at them and said, "Good morning," and they said it back, and then went back to their cereal. He told her he had heard about the gala from a mutual contact, a hospital administrator who had mentioned Kyle's invitation to Abby almost as gossip, not knowing what it meant. He had spent 2 days deciding whether to come. He almost hadn't. "I'm not here out of pity," he said. He folded his hands on the table and looked at her steadily. "I'm here because I've watched what these men do, and I've watched good people absorb it quietly, and I decided a long time ago I wouldn't be someone who just keeps watching." "I don't need rescuing," Abby said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "No," he agreed. "You need company. There's a difference." He told her something else then, something that changed the temperature of the conversation entirely. In the course of preparing a significant donation to St. Aurelius, he had been given access to their financial records. What he found in the Weston Wing documentation had stopped him cold. Kyle's charitable contribution was not from his personal wealth. It had been drawn from Viridian Solutions operating funds without board authorization, routed through a shell account that obscured the source. The investors who had been told the money was earmarked for company expansion had no idea. The donation was embezzlement dressed in philanthropy. Kyle was using stolen money to put his name on a hospital wall. Edmund had already placed a call to the SEC's regional office. He had brought the documentation to a federal attorney he trusted. The process was moving. "Tonight," he said, "he will stand in that ballroom and accept gratitude for a generosity that isn't his. He will do it in front of the people he has spent years performing for." He paused. "And he sent you an invitation to watch. I'd like to go with you if you'll allow it." Abby looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked quietly. He was silent before he answered. When he spoke, his voice was different, lower, more careful. "Because my daughter is alive because of you," he said. "I have watched her graduate college, start her life, call me on Sunday mornings, and none of that would exist if you hadn't been in that ER at 2 in the morning doing your job with everything you had." He looked at his hands. "I owe you a debt I've never been able to pay. Let me be useful tonight." The limousine arrived at 6:30. Abby's neighbors watched from windows. Mrs. Delacroix from 3B stepped into the hallway and pressed a hand to her mouth. Rosie and Pearl, both in cream-colored dresses with satin sashes, both wearing their good shoes that had only been worn twice, ran to the window and announced the car's presence to the entire apartment as though they were reporting breaking news. Inside the limousine, a stylist Edmund had arranged worked quickly and without drama. The gown was deep burgundy, fitted at the waist, with a neckline that was elegant without trying. Abby sat very still while the woman worked on her hair and thought about all the ways the evening could go wrong. What if I freeze up, she said. You won't, Edmund said from the seat across from her, not looking up from the briefing document in his hands. You don't know that. I've seen you work, he said simply. You don't freeze. The Meridian Grand was lit from the outside like something out of a magazine. Photographers clustered near the entrance. A line of luxury cars curved around the block, disgorging guests in gowns and tuxedos. The building glittered. The limousine rolled to the entrance and stopped. Abby looked out the window and felt her heartbeat in her throat. Remember, Edmund said quietly, you're not walking in to survive the night, you're walking in to end it. She exhaled. The door opened. The entrance was long and bright and crowded with photographers who had not been expecting anything unusual at this point in the evening. And then Abby stepped out. She had not walked anywhere in years, with her chin up and her shoulders back, and the specific confidence that comes from knowing you have nothing left to lose. But she walked now. Rosie held her right hand. Pearl held her left. Edmund Chase was at her side, and his presence alone sent a ripple through the crowd. He was not a man who showed up to functions like this, and photographers surged forward to capture whatever this was. Who is she? Is that Edmund Chase? Wait, are those Kyle's kids? Inside the ballroom, Kyle was mid-conversation with the mayor's chief of staff when someone touched his elbow. He turned. His communications director leaned in and said something in his ear. Kyle's face went through 3 expressions in the space of 2 seconds. He looked toward the entrance. Abby walked into the ballroom like a woman who had survived something Kyle could not imagine and come out the other side still standing. Her daughters moved beside her, small and certain. Edmund walked at her right, and people stepped back instinctively. Not out of fear, but because the 3 of them together had a gravity that pulled the room. Monica, standing near the champagne table, set her glass down very carefully. Kyle recovered. He was good at that. He crossed the ballroom with his smile rebuilt and his voice at its most performative warmth. Abby, he said it with an almost law, as though her presence were delightful and only slightly absurd. You actually came and you brought. He glanced at Edmund with studied bemusement. Dr. Chase, what a surprise. Kyle, Abby said. He turned to the small crowd gathering around them, reading the room, adjusting. This is my ex-wife, he announced, with the ease of a man narrating a nature documentary. We don't always see eye to eye, but I've always believed in keeping doors open. Very brave of her to come, given. He let the sentence trail with just enough implication to land. Given everything. Given how far she's fallen. Abby felt the old familiar flush of shame begin to rise, and then felt it stop. Kyle, she said, her voice clear, carrying. I'm glad you invited me. I think a lot of people here tonight should hear what you've been building. Something shifted in his eyes. Edmund stepped forward then, unhurried, and addressed the circle of guests with the authority of a man who had spent his life speaking in rooms where the stakes were life and death. Many of you are here tonight because you were told this donation represents Kyle Weston's personal commitment to this community, he said. I've spent the last several weeks reviewing the financial records involved in that transaction, in connection with my own partnership negotiations with St. Aurelius. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. What the records show is that the donation was drawn from Viridian Solutions investor funds, without board authorization or disclosure, and routed through a shell account. The investors in this room, and those not in this room, were not informed. Their money went to put his name on a wall. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Kyle's smile stayed on his face for approximately 4 more seconds before it stopped working. That's, he laughed, but the laugh had no air in it. That's a mischaracterization of a standard. This is what she does. She sends people too. I contacted the SEC 3 days ago, Edmund said simply. I'm not here as anyone's messenger. I'm here because I have an obligation to the institutions I support, and because this man invited the mother of his children here tonight to humiliate her, and I thought it was important that the people who have supported him understand who they've been supporting. Monica had moved away from the champagne table. She was now standing near the edge of the crowd, and the calculation on her face was something almost beautiful in its speed. She was running the math, running it fast. Kyle turned to the room, His voice went raw. "You're really going to believe this? He's doing this because of some grudge. These are fabricated documents. This is a smear campaign." "Kyle," Monica's voice cut through from across the room. He turned. She was removing something from her finger. Her engagement ring. He had proposed at a rooftop dinner in February, and the photos had been all over her social channels for months. She held it up briefly, in full view of the crowd, of the photographers who had moved inside, of the people already reaching for their phones. "I don't know what you've done," she said, and her voice was cold in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her own survival. "But I'm not going down with it." She placed the ring on the nearest table with a small, decisive click. Kyle said her name once. She didn't turn around. He said it again. A security guard appeared at his elbow. And then 2 federal agents, who had been waiting in a room down the hall since 7 o'clock, walked into the ballroom. They had been notified by Edmund's legal contact and had coordinated with the venue. Kyle Weston was informed in front of 200 guests and a photograph that would be on the Tribune's website by 11 that night that he was being detained in connection with a federal fraud investigation. He did not go quietly. He told the agents they had no idea who they were dealing with. He told the room they were all being manipulated. He looked once at Abby, a look of pure fury, like a man who had set a fire and could not understand why it was burning him. The agents escorted him out. The ballroom was very still. Abby stood at the center of it with her daughter's hands in hers and felt something she had not felt in 4 years. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter. Something closer to the feeling of setting down something very heavy after carrying it so long she had forgotten she was carrying it. She turned to face the room. She had not planned to speak, but the crowd was watching her with something she had not expected. Not pity, not embarrassment, but real attention. "I didn't come here tonight to cause this," she said. Her voice was even. "I came because he wanted me to walk through these doors looking like a cautionary tale, like proof of something." She looked down at Rosie, then Pearl. "These are his daughters. He has never met them. He left before they were born, and he has spent 4 years making sure they had less so he could have more." She looked back up at the crowd. "I have spent 4 years working night shifts and skipping dinners and doing what needed to be done, and I am not ashamed of a single day of it. I am not the warning story in his success narrative. I'm just a person who kept going." Someone started clapping, then someone else. It was not the thunderous applause of a movie. It was the quieter sound of people who were genuinely moved, who had expected something else and gotten this instead. A woman near the front was crying. She was probably someone who had her own version of this story. Most women did. Later, after the guests had reorganized themselves into the bewildered cocktail party formation that follows something no one expected, Edmund found Abby near the windows overlooking the Chicago River. The girls had fallen mostly asleep against each other on a velvet bench nearby, Pearl's head on Rosie's shoulder, their good shoes dangling off their feet. "You should get them home," he said. "I know." She didn't move yet. She watched the city lights make patterns on the water below. "I meant what I said this morning," he told her. "About debts." "You don't owe me anything, Edmund." "I didn't say I did." He paused. "I said I've been watching. 4 years of watching someone carry more than anyone should have to carry alone." He was quiet for a moment. "I lost my wife 9 years ago. I told myself for a long time that was the end of that chapter, that I didn't have the right to want anything again." He turned to look at her. "I think I was wrong." Abby looked at him. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," he said carefully. "I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. The legal process, the foundation I'd like to help you start. Whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere, and if someday, when all of this is quieter, you would let me take you to dinner, just dinner, I would be very grateful." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Ask me again in 6 months." He smiled. A real one, the kind that reached his eyes. "I'll put it in my calendar." The months that followed moved the way healing moves, not in a straight line, not cleanly, but always forward. Kyle Weston was indicted on 4 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of wire fraud in connection with the Viridian Solutions accounts. His bail was set high, his legal team was expensive, and not, ultimately, enough. The Weston Wing naming rights were revoked by St. Aurelius, pending trial. His investors, several of whom had been in the ballroom that night, filed civil suits. The name Kyle Weston became, in the Chicago business community, a reference point for a specific kind of recklessness, the kind that mistakes performance for substance and forgets that other people are watching. Monica Briggs spent 3 weeks trying to reshape the narrative on her social channels before the silence of the brands became impossible to ignore. The engagement ring had been photographed on the table by 4 different guests. The images circulated. The deals dried up. She gave one interview that went badly and then went quiet for a long time. She was not destroyed, but she was humbled, which was possibly worse for someone whose entire architecture had been built on being seen a certain way. Abby did not take satisfaction in watching them fall. She was too busy building. With Edmund's support, financial, practical, and the kind that shows up without being asked, she launched a small nonprofit in early spring. The Stanton Initiative. Not a grand name. An honest one. It connected single mothers in the healthcare field with childcare resources, career reentry programs, and legal support for custody and child support enforcement. In its first 8 months, it served 63 women. She went back to nursing. It took 6 months of requalification coursework and a lot of nights when she was not sure she had the energy for it. But she got there. She stood in the ER at Northwestern Memorial on a Tuesday morning in November and felt something click back into place. Rosie and Pearl started kindergarten in September. They were different from each other in the small specific ways that twins are. Rosie wanted to know how everything worked. Pearl wanted to know how everyone felt. They were 4 years old and already more themselves than most people manage to become. They asked about their father once, and Abby told them the truth in the gentlest language she had. They seemed to accept it the way children accept things that are simply the shape of their world. She hoped in the quiet space of herself that they would always know, from the evidence of her life, that a person could be left and still become something whole. Edmund came to dinner on a Thursday in October, 6 months and 3 days after the gala. He brought flowers and a chess set, because Pearl had mentioned she was learning. He stayed until 9. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He asked Abby again in November, very quietly, sitting at her kitchen table after the girls were asleep, with the tea going cold between them. She said yes. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius that Edmund had kept for years, one that he shared with Abby on a walk along the lakefront in early December. The kind of cold Chicago morning where your breath makes small clouds and the water is iron gray and everything feels honest. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. She had spent 4 years believing the hardest years were proof of what she lacked. What she understood now, standing beside a man who had known his own losses, watching her daughters run ahead toward the water, was that those years had been the making of her. Every night shift. Every skipped meal. Every moment she had rocked 2 small children to sleep and quietly promised herself to keep going. She had kept going. And on the other side of all of it, there was this: a Thursday dinner, a chess set on the coffee table, 2 little girls who called out for her in the night and found her there every time. The world does not always punish the people who deserve it on the timeline that would be most satisfying. But sometimes it does. And what you build in the waiting, the grit, the grace, the absolute refusal to disappear, that belongs to you regardless. Abigail Stanton had been thrown away by a man who thought discarding people was the same as moving forward. She had not disappeared. She had arrived.